Joining us now, first on CNBC's Canadian National CEO, Jean-Jacques Rouet. Nice to have you with us, JJ. And let me just start with regulatory, because, of course, it is going to prove to be a key here, as it is for Canadian Pacific's hopes as well. What gives you the confidence that you can get the approval from regulators for a deal in which, frankly, you are a larger company than is Canadian Pacific and may have more overlaps as well than they do with KSU?
Well, good morning, David, and thank you for having me this morning at CNBC to really talk about what we feel is fantastic news for the CN shareholders, but also with KSU. We're reaching out to Kansas City, their shareholders, their board, their employee, to really create a very solid continental railroad, a premium 21st century railroad. And by doing that, we can create the value that we are, the solid offer that we have this morning. On the regulatory front, this is not the first time that we buy a property in North America. Since we did the IPO 25 years ago, we did 18 acquisitions of different size, a couple of them in the United States, namely the Illinois Central, which at that time we had put into a voting trust, which runs between Chicago and New Orleans. We also bought Wisconsin Central, Great Lakes Transportation, and more recently, the EG&E. So we understand the process, we understand what's required, and we believe we can make this transaction work for the KCS shareholders, for the CN shareholders, as well as all the stakeholders that the regulators have to be assured are being looked after.
Yeah, but Jean-Jacques, it was only a couple of weeks ago, April 1st, to be specific, that you came out with an objection to the granting of a waiver to KSU that will allow, for example, the same structure that you are now pursuing in terms of their ability to close into trust. I mean, you objected to them being able to do it. Why should you be able to do it?
No, the filing at that time was not about the trust. It was about the new rule or the old rule. The STB will decide if they decide the old rule or the new rule. In both cases, our offer and the offer of the other contender are based on having putting a company in a voting trust and then concluding the transaction, paying the shareholders of KCS by year end with a cash component. In our case, $200 instead of $90. As well as in the case of CN, the remaining amount in shares. So the filing at that time was about so-called old rule and new rule, not about the voting trust itself.
All right, but all right, explain to me, though, why, because as opposed to a number of the other large rails that were kind of neutral, you chose to object here. You know, I'm just trying to understand your timing. I'm trying to really understand this idea that, frankly, you're as interested in making sure Canadian Pacific doesn't own this asset as you are actually owning it yourself.
So in the case of the offer we just made this morning, it's really about what we can create in terms of value. The economy in North America is increasingly, built by the service sectors, people who are, have good jobs, good paying jobs with good disposable income. 70% of GDP is related to the kind of freight generated people consume, as opposed to people who manufacture. Manufacturing is still part of the story as well, but it's about building an intermodal network between the three countries.
Right.
And we believe that we will get the regulatory approval to create that, which is frankly is very much lacking. There's really not a very solid USMCA supply chain in place to really connect these three countries together. Yeah,
well, all right, specific to that then, when people tell me, you have certain track agreements into the Gulf of Mexico, for example, and, given KSU also goes down there, you could have a chokehead on the sort of energy production of energy in the Gulf. ExxonMobil, for example, an important customer. So, is there a willingness, sorry, let me just finish. Is there a willingness on your part to divest any of these track agreements, or how do you respond to those who say, hey, this could be an issue?
The so-called issue is related to only about 70 miles of overlap between the CN and the KCS network. It's a segment of track that runs between Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and New Orleans. And there's 5 customers and 8 plants on those 2-for-1, and we can resolve that commercially or other ways, and we fully intend to do that. We want to make sure that this will be dealt properly and not be an issue. You go back to the question of petrochemical. This is a growth story, right? It's a story about growing business together. So definitely anything that's is possible in terms of growth, we will want to enable as opposed to make it difficult. And this is a pro-competitive merger. It's a growth story. It's about creating new business. It's about converting freight, which is on the highway, to put it on the rail. And it's also to enable customers to do more trade and connect to more customers. So it's not about removing any competition Contrary to that, it's really about creating new options for the people who use the North American rail network.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.